Some watches you spend an age pondering over before you buy, and others end up being something of an impulse purchase because, well, you'll see. This is the Fears Brunswick Aurora, and it's the latest addition to the collection, and the first joint watch I've ever bought. What do I mean by that, and why did I buy it? I'll go through all the positives, all the negatives, and everything you need to know about my new watch. Some of you may already know that for gits and shiggles, I like to take the odd picture of space. I find space absolutely fascinating because it literally contains everything ever in it. You, me, my iPhone, supermassive black holes, everything. It also, very recently, contained the Aurora Borealis, at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localised entirely within my back garden, and I missed it. I really have no idea how the news completely slipped me by, but yeah, a bucket list item arrived on my doorstep, and I was too busy binge watching the latest season of Clarkson's Farm. So now I'll have to pay a load of money to go to the Arctic Circle, and I probably won't see it there either. Well, there is another solution, and it's this, the Fears Brunswick steamed hams, Aurora. When I first saw it in pictures, my esteemed professional reaction was, I need mother of pearl in my life like I need potpourri and a headscarf. I wasn't ready to start channeling my inner Balmoral spec QE2, so I didn't give it another moment's thought. Tell you who did though. My dearest darling wife. You know when your partner just sends you an image of something with no additional context and you immediately know it means financial destruction? Yeah, well, I got one of those from her, and so it was up to me to find an excuse not to see one in person. Not too difficult since the only place to physically see the watch is in Bristol, Fear's hometown. Except I must have been a murderous dictator in a former life, because at a completely unrelated watch evening I so happened to be at, Fears were present showing off their wares. Of course, Charlotte made a beeline for the Aurora and was so excited by it she almost shit her pants. Once I'd lowered my eyes from rolling them so far back into my head I could see into the future, I finally took my first look at the Fears Brunswick Aurora. So you're probably familiar with mother of pearl. It's all the gristly bits mollusks plaster the insides of their shells with, not just to spruce the place up, but to give them a bit of protection from parasites and stuff like that. Same stuff pearls are made of, a material called nacre. I had come to associate mother of pearl with the smell of lavender and floral doilies, usually found on a Rolex smaller than the plank length and filled with enough wrist debris to fashion another human from. But this was different. First, the Brunswick Aurora is a 40mm watch with a cushion case, so it takes up more space than a Brit towel on a Spanish beach. Lugs are thankfully very short, so the strap returns quickly and makes the watch more wearable, perhaps more unfortunately on even the most wife-sized wrists. But with that big case comes big space for a big dial, the part that puts the Aurora name pride of place. So how they've done it is to make up the dial in two different sections, an outer ring, a nebulous donut if you will, and an inner disc, the core. You might perhaps think that this is to overcome the issue of finding shells big enough and flat enough for that entire dial, and that forming it from two components makes that easier. Unfortunately, the dial donut still needs the same size piece, and so actually what this multi-dial setup has been used to achieve is an effect that makes the Aurora less octogenarian and more awesome as all hell. An oyster species called Pinctada maxima was chosen, which for all you non-Latin speakers out there translates to f***ing massive oyster. They're the size of a dinner plate. The outer dial donut is a lighter piece of mother of pearl, more billowy and cloudy, like the fog gate obscuring the next ass whooping about to be handed to you in Dark Souls. The inner disc, however, is a darker colour, more ominous and foreboding, like when you actually get to see the boss about to whoop your ass in Dark Souls. The colour difference is achieved by tinting the backside of the material, aligning the sections at different angles, and even varying the height between them to alter the effect. The net result is a display that looks like what everyone actually saw that night of the Aurora, muted, pale and grey, with only the most subtle hint of colour and movement. That is until the light hits it just right, and then it burst into a display of contrast and colour like everyone pretended they saw, but actually it was just a long exposure photo. Greens, blues, pinks and purples all illuminate in bright vivid colour. This is nature's compact disc, a rainbow of light interference split apart into separate colours. The dial texture moves in ripples and waves, a billowing space cloud consuming stars on a galactic scale, all hidden in a watch. Will Smith is probably looking for it right now. It's really quite astonishing to see and looks different every time you see it. Catch the angle just right and the undersides of the hands cast light onto the dial for two thin beams of radioactive rainbow. It really is a nebula of shade and saturation, and perhaps one of, if not the prettiest dials I have ever laid my eyes on. The choice to separate it into two discs means there's almost always a part of it scooping up light, scrambling it and firing it right into your pupils, so it never gets boring to look at. Of course, despite the fastidious nature of owner Nicholas Bowman Scargill, he hasn't quite managed to persuade the oysters to form exactly the same texture every time. So what you see here will differ across every watch, but each one has been painstakingly selected to offer as hallucinogenic an experience as possible. What gets completely overlooked is the everything else about the watch, and it's a good thing that nothing else dares to try compete with the awe of that dial. Nevertheless, the quiet, elevated perfection of Fears shines through, with the diamond-polished hands and markers gleaming with a liquid shine. It's one of those things that's very hard to convey, but there's polishing, and then there's polishing. These aren't just shiny, they're like little containers of mercury. The case features a mix of brushed and polished finishes, again executed to an extremely high level, and the onion crown is also polished. Dial print is in white, again so as not to interfere with the visual experience, but still crisp enough to easily discern. You might wonder if reading the time is tricky with polished hands and markers on a middle grey dial, but with mirror finishes either bright white or jet black, they contrast well enough. And so, as is customary around these parts, I agreed with Charlotte, and we put an order in for the Brunswick Aurora. But what's it actually like as a watch to wear on the daily? It's all very well and good having a watch with a dial fashioned from the tears of angels, but since it will be displayed on a wrist and not a museum, it needs to be a capable daily wear. And in this case, not just for me, but for Charlotte as well. We bought it on the strap, which I'll tell you a little more about later, and we got a couple of different lengths so we can swap between us. Thankfully, and more watchmakers need to step into the 21st century and do the same, the strap is quick release. There's a bracelet too, which is nicely made for sure, but neither of us are really the bracelet type. Unless it's diamonds. I'm pretty sure Charlotte wouldn't say no to that. And would you believe it, but this thing, despite its celestial aura, is about as wearable as any other watch I can think of. The cushion case shape slim enough at 11mm to be enjoyed by both me and Charlotte, and also, thanks to the screw-down crown, it's water resistant to 150 meters, so you can go back and threaten all the other oysters with it. The movement inside, which isn't on display, is the ETA 2824-2, which is as sturdy a workhorse as you can imagine. It's not flash, and it's certainly not fancy, but it is serviceable, with parts readily available and the form factor familiar with any watchmaker worth their salt. It's probably the most uninteresting thing about the entire watch, but at least it won't be the most annoying. It runs reliably, unseen and unheard, keeping the center seconds marching on at a steadfast 8 beats per second for a duration of 38 hours between winds. The Brunswick Aurora, as mentioned, comes on a choice of a quick-release strap or bracelet. I'm not too familiar with the bracelet, although the strap, in blue nubuck with a hard-wearing Alcantara lining, is soft and comfortable, and pairs very well with the blend of classic and contemporary of the rest of the watch. Being nubuck, it will probably go shiny quite quickly, but can usually be knocked back into shape with a suede brush and a gentle clean. Now here's a new feature I'm including thanks to the support of AMW strap partner Deluxe. A big part of long-term watch ownership is knowing you can switch out straps and get a different fresh look without having to shell out for an entirely new watch. So here's 4 different options for you to get an idea. First is a light grey Epsom, a fine-grained leather popularised by Hermes from Tannery du Paille in France. Then a glossy lagoon blue alligator flank, which is softer and more flexible than standard alligator, so you don't need to break it in. This white cut-to-size rubber is great when you're getting a sweat on and is a go-to for me. And then a wildcard denim babel from the Tempesti Tannery in Italy, a leather that looks very similar to denim, much cheaper than buying the denim Patek Philippe 5980G. They're all quick release and very easy to fit, and are perfect for cheapskates like me who want the feeling of a new watch without actually buying one. You can find links to these exact Deluxe straps and many more in the description below. So what could you realistically be considering instead of the Brunswick Aurora? Well, I have seen plenty of other mother-of-pearl dial watches, but not really anything like this. Most others have that old lady vibe, so although they're the same on paper, it's hard to realistically offer them as an alternative. Since 556 perhaps, in black mother-of-pearl at £1,470, or the 38mm Omega Aquaterra at £6,390, although that's got diamond markers so, despite its sporty case, still lingers around the old folks' home a bit. Zelos's Aurora Field 38mm titanium mosaic mother-of-pearl is probably closest in terms of approach at $559, but the refinement, although great for the price, just isn't up there with the fears. The reality is there's not much else to compete with the visual impact of this very big and very well executed dial, and so you'll find, like I did, that if you want the Brunswick Aurora, then it's the Brunswick Aurora you've got to have. It's not all fruitcake and seaside holidays, however. The biggest downside of the Brunswick Aurora is that your one won't look like my one. They all look different. Fears go out of their way to make each experience impactful, but there's no making them identical. That's a good thing in many ways, so long as the one you get warms your cockles in the same way this one does right now. You can always go visit them in Bristol to have a look in person, although with limited supply of these watches because of the difficulty in making the dial, what you get might just have to be what you get. Personally, I'm not a fan of the onion crown, although Charlotte loves it. I would much rather see something a bit less pumpkin-like. It's not at odds with the rest of the watch per se, but to me it feels like the least refined part of it. It's well made for sure, but to me it belongs on a pocket watch. I'm on the fence about the solid caseback. The movement's not worth seeing, so then really it would be nicer to have a movement that is. Thankfully, it's not the main selling point of this watch, so it doesn't matter too much, but then it could have been really elevated by something pretty in the back as well. Speaking of elevated, the trickiest part of this watch purchase is the price. At £3,850 on the strap, it's not only a few £100 more than the standard Brunswick, but also a very strong price for an ETA-powered watch in general. You're well into Tudor territory, not necessarily similar watches, but a benchmark in pricing, and straying dangerously close to Rolex. It's not at Rolex, but you can just about see the faint hazy outline of the crown in the distance. You do get what you pay for, however, and you should buy this watch knowing that's the thing you're paying to get. Fundamentally, fears operate on a level of refinement that I can't really explain. Some people might look at this, then look at something half the price, and not see the difference. Others will be floored by the razor-sharp details and mirror-flat polishing. That last 20% of effort isn't discernible by everyone, but you do have to pay for it. If you have to hold your phone either really close or really far away from your face to read it, the extra may be wasted on you. If your vision is closer to 20/20, however, then at this price point you will struggle to find another watch pumping out this much clarity. That used to be Grand Seiko's domain, with the Snowflake probably a closer competitor than any of the other mother-of-pearl watches I listed earlier, since having advanced another £2,000 along. But of course the star of the show has to be the incredible mother-of-pearl dial. Inversely to the real thing, this Aurora is beyond anything pictures or video can capture, a layered, three-dimensional look into the soul of the cosmos, and it manages it without giving off even the slightest whiff of antiseptics. I may have missed that backyard Aurora, but I can at least settle for knowing I have my very own private display on offer on demand. Right here, at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely upon my wrist. This collaborative watch buying decision with my wife has certainly worked out very well and introduced me to something I wouldn't have otherwise considered. Would you share a watch with a partner or try something you'd not have otherwise looked at? Let me know in the comments. And with a big thanks to my Patreons for supporting me, who you can join via the link in the description. And remember, if you do want a new watch and you want some brownie points too, buy it for your partner and wear it for yourself. Goodbye.